My son stood up at his own retirement party, the party I paid for, in a restaurant I chose, surrounded by people I had known for decades, and announced to the entire room that his in-laws would be moving into my house. Not asking, not suggesting, announcing, like it had already been decided, like my name wasn't on the deed. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I am 63 years old. I have worked since I was 16. I buried a husband at 41, raised a son alone, held down 2 jobs for 7 years, so I would never have to ask anyone for anything. The house I live in, the house my son casually handed over to strangers at a party I bought with money I earned, with my own 2 hands. There is not a single square foot of it that doesn't belong to me in every way a thing can belong to a person. So when I tell you what happened next, I need you to know that I did not overreact. I did not make a scene. I did not embarrass myself or my son in front of his colleagues and friends. I sat very still, smiled the way my mother taught me to smile when something unspeakable happens in public. And I waited. I am 63 years old, and I have learned that the most powerful thing a woman can do is wait until she is somewhere private before she becomes a force of nature. Let me start from the beginning, because this story doesn't make sense without it. My husband, Robert, passed away when our son Daniel was just 12 years old. A heart attack. No warning, no illness before it, nothing to prepare us. One Tuesday morning, Robert kissed me on the cheek, drove to work, and never came home. Daniel and I were left with a modest life insurance payout, a mortgage on a house that was too big for us, and the kind of grief that lives in your chest for years before it finally moves down to something quieter. I sold that house. It was the right decision. I took what equity there was, combined it with Robert's life insurance, and I was careful with every dollar. I worked as an office manager for a medical practice during the day, and I cleaned houses on weekends for 3 years, not because I had to, but because I was terrified. I had a child to raise and no backup plan, and terror is a remarkable motivator. By the time Daniel went to college, I had saved enough to put a down payment on a smaller place in a good neighborhood and still keep a cushion in the bank. Then something unexpected happened. I got promoted. The doctor I worked for retired and sold the practice to a larger medical group, and they brought me on as the regional office coordinator. The salary nearly doubled. I had health insurance, a retirement account, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I could breathe. Daniel graduated, got a job in logistics management, and did reasonably well for himself. He was never ambitious the way some young men are, but he was steady and kind, and I was proud of him. When he was 32, he met a woman named Melissa at a conference in Atlanta. She was polished and pretty, and she had the kind of confidence that comes from never having had to worry too much about money. Her parents owned a mid-sized event planning company in Charlotte. Her father, whom I will call my son's father-in-law, had built the business over 30 years. Her mother had handled the social side of things, the client relationships, the charitable appearances, the expensive friendships. I liked Melissa at first. I genuinely did. She was smart, and she made my son happy, and I thought, this is all a mother can ask for. I was not looking for reasons to distrust her. I was not that kind of mother-in-law. I stayed in my lane. I did not call too often. I did not offer opinions that weren't requested. I sent birthday cards and Christmas gifts, and I showed up when I was invited, and I left when it was appropriate. I thought we had a functional, respectful relationship. The wedding was 4 years ago. It was beautiful and expensive, and her parents paid for the majority of it. I contributed what I had agreed to contribute: the rehearsal dinner, the flowers for the church, and a cash gift that represented a significant portion of my savings at the time. I did not complain about any of it. It was my son's wedding, and I wanted it to be wonderful. What I did not fully understand at the time was that the business was already struggling. Her parents had overextended in the years before the pandemic, taken on debt to expand into a new market that never materialized the way they had projected. The wedding, which was, by any reasonable measure, excessive, was partially financed on credit. I did not know this then. I learned it much later, in pieces, the way you always learn the things people don't want you to know. The 2 years after the wedding, Melissa's parents kept up appearances. They took a trip to Italy. They attended galas. They were photographed at charity events. Daniel and Melissa bought a condo downtown, and Daniel seemed content. I visited occasionally, We had Sunday dinners a few times a month. Life was ordinary and I was grateful for ordinary. Then last spring, things began to shift. Melissa seemed tense when I saw her. Daniel started calling me more often, which I initially took as a good sign. I had always wished he would call more, but there was something in his voice that I couldn't quite name. He asked me once, very casually, whether I had thought about downsizing. I told him I was perfectly happy where I was, and I changed the subject. A few weeks later, he asked me if I had ever considered having family closer by. Not moving in, he was careful to say that. Just, whether I thought about it. Whether I got lonely. I told him I had a full life, and a good neighbor, and a book club on Thursdays, and that I was not lonely. Thank you. He dropped it. I should have paid more attention to those questions. I know that now. But I trusted my son. I had raised him. I knew him. I did not believe he was capable of what he did next. In October, Daniel turned 45. His company threw him a retirement party, not his retirement, obviously, but a milestone celebration, the kind companies do for employees who reach a certain number of years of service. They reserved a private room at a nice Italian restaurant downtown. About 40 people were there. His colleagues, a few friends, some family. Melissa's parents came. Her younger sister came. I came, because he was my son and I would always come. The dinner was lovely. The speeches were warm and funny. Daniel said a few words and thanked everyone, and for a while I just sat there and felt the ordinary happiness of watching my child be appreciated by people who knew him well. Then he picked up his glass again. He said he had one more thing he wanted to share. He said that this next chapter of his life was going to involve some exciting changes. He said that Melissa's parents had been going through a difficult transition. He used the word transition. I remember it specifically, and that as a family, they had decided to come together and support one another the way families do. He said that his in-laws and Melissa's younger sister would be moving in with me temporarily while they worked through some financial reorganization. He said it to the whole room, smiling, his glass raised, like it was good news, like I was already aware and had already agreed and was sitting there nodding along, glad to be of service. Every head in the room turned toward me. I felt it the way you feel a weather change. That shift in the air. 40 people waiting to see how I would react. I smiled. I raised my own glass. I said, "That's quite an announcement, Daniel," in the warmest voice I could manage, and I let the moment pass. People laughed a little uncertain, and the conversation moved on. Inside, I was absolutely still. Not angry yet, that came later. In that moment, I was simply trying to understand what had just happened. Whether I had misheard, whether there was some context I was missing that would make this make sense. There was not. I drove home alone. I sat in my car in my own driveway for 10 minutes. Then I went inside and I walked through every room of my house, slowly, the way you walk through a place you're seeing for the first time. My bedroom where I had slept alone for 22 years and made my peace with that. The guest room where Daniel had stayed as an adult, where his childhood photographs still sat on the bookshelf because I liked them there. The small back room I had turned into an office. The kitchen I had renovated myself over 4 years, one project at a time, saving up for each one. This was mine, every inch of it. And my son had given it away at a party. I did not call him that night. I needed to think clearly, and I knew that if I called him then, I would not be clear. I would be something else entirely. The next morning, I called an attorney. A woman I had used years before for a property matter, sharp and no nonsense, and exactly what I needed. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she asked me a series of practical questions. Did I have a copy of my deed? Yes. Had I given anyone a key? No. Had I signed anything, verbally agreed to anything, sent any message that could be interpreted as consent? Absolutely not. She told me my position was clear and solid, and she told me a few other things I want to come back to. While I was on the phone with my attorney, my son called 3 times. I let it go to voicemail. After I hung up, I listened to his messages. The first was cheerful and a little nervous. The second was more serious. He said he knew the announcement had been a surprise and that he should have talked to me first. He used the word sorry once, briefly, in passing. The way you say sorry when you back into someone at the grocery store. The third message was quieter. He said he really needed me to call him back because things were complicated and he needed my help. He needed my help. Not I made a terrible mistake. Not I should never have done that. He needed my help, which meant he had already decided I would provide it, and was now waiting for the logistics. I called him back that afternoon. I was calm. I want to be clear about that. I was not shouting. I was not crying. I was completely calm in the way that you can only be calm when you have already made your decision and you no longer feel afraid. I said, "Daniel, I need you to explain to me what happened last night." He explained. It came out in pieces. Some of it things I had suspected, and some of it things that genuinely shocked me. The business had not been struggling. The business had collapsed. Her parents owed close to $400,000 across multiple creditors. They had lost the lease on their office space 2 months earlier. They had been staying with Melissa's aunt, but that arrangement had ended. Her sister had been living in a studio apartment that she could no longer afford on her own. The family had been meeting for weeks about what to do, and what they had decided was that I would take them in while they restructured. My son, who loved me and whom I had raised, had participated in weeks of planning about the disposition of my home without once picking up the phone to ask me. I let him finish. Then I said, very carefully, "Daniel, no one is moving into my home. No one has my permission, and no one will be getting it. Your in-laws need to make other arrangements." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said that he had already told them they could. He said they were counting on it. He said his sister-in-law had already given notice on her apartment. I said, "That is not my problem. You made promises on my behalf without my knowledge or consent, and those are your promises to manage. I am not responsible for commitments you made without asking me." He said, "Mom, they have nowhere to go." I said, "I understand that, and I am sorry they are struggling, but my house is not the solution." He said something that I want to tell you because it is the thing that closed the door for me more fully than anything else. He said that I had 4 bedrooms, and I lived alone, and it seemed selfish not to help when I had the space, and they had the need. Selfish. He used that word. I had worked 2 jobs so he could have new school clothes and weekend trips, and a college education with no student debt. I had gone without for years, so he could have enough. I had watched every dollar, planned every decision, built a life out of careful choices, and my son looked at the house that represented the culmination of all of that and saw a resource he could allocate. I told him I loved him. I told him I was not angry, which was not entirely true but was the right thing to say. And I told him that the conversation was finished. I called my attorney back. I had her prepare a formal letter notifying Daniel and his wife that no one had permission to enter my home, that any attempt to do so would be considered trespassing, and that I had engaged legal counsel to protect my property interests. She sent it that day, by certified mail and by email. We had a digital trail by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I also changed my locks. I want to be clear, I had never given Daniel a key, but I changed them anyway because I wanted to be absolutely certain, and because the act of doing it made me feel less like a woman whose house had been given away and more like a woman who was in control of her own doors. I also scheduled an appointment with my estate planning attorney, a separate matter from the property letter, but related in spirit. I had not updated my will in several years. I updated it 2 days after the party. My daughter-in-law called me. I answered because I thought it was important that she hear from me directly. She was composed, calculated, even. She said she knew this had been handled badly, and she was sorry about the way Daniel had announced it. She said she wanted to talk person to person, woman to woman, about the reality of the situation. She said her parents were good people in a difficult position. She said her sister was 26 and scared. She said it would only be for a few months, and that her parents fully intended to pay rent, which was the first time money had ever been mentioned, and which struck me as something she had added quickly when she realized she needed a new angle. I said, "I appreciate you calling. I want to be respectful to you because you are my son's wife, and I take that seriously. But I need to tell you something clearly so there is no confusion. My home is not available. It was never available. No conversation about this should have proceeded as far as it did without my knowledge and my agreement. The fact that it did is a serious matter, and I am treating it seriously. If your family needs assistance, there are resources available. I am not one of them." She was quiet. Then she said, "I think you're making this harder than it needs to be." I said, "I think someone made it hard the moment they started planning this without asking me." She did not call back. What happened over the next 2 weeks was something I had not fully anticipated. The campaign. That is the only word for it. My son called and texted daily. His mother-in-law sent me a handwritten letter, which I have to admit was a tactical choice I respected even as I saw through it completely. Her father emailed me twice, formal and professional, as though we were in a business negotiation, which I suppose in his mind we were. Melissa's younger sister, whom I had met perhaps 6 times in 4 years, sent me a message on social media asking if we could talk. Just the two of us, because she felt like we had never really connected as family and she would love to change that. I read everything. I responded to nothing. My attorney had advised me not to engage, and beyond the legal guidance, I simply had nothing to say that I had not already said. My son showed up at my house one Saturday morning. He knocked, which was the one courtesy he extended. I opened the door, and I looked at him, my boy, my 45-year-old boy, who had my husband's eyes, and I felt both things at the same time, the love that doesn't go anywhere and the cold clarity of what he had done. I let him in. I made coffee. I sat across from him at the kitchen table, where I had sat across from him 1,000 times over 45 years. He said he was sorry. A real sorry this time, not the passing kind. He said he had gotten caught up in solving a problem, and he had stopped thinking of me as a person who deserved to be asked, and started thinking of me as a resource that could be used. He said Melissa's family had been very persuasive, and that he had been under enormous pressure, and that he had made a terrible mistake. He said it clearly. He looked me in the eyes when he said it. I believed him. I want you to know I believed him, because I think it matters that I am telling you the truth about everything, not just the parts that make me look righteous. I believed that he was sorry and that the remorse was genuine. I also told him that sorry did not change what I had decided. He asked what I had decided. I told him that I had updated my estate plans. I told him this not as a threat. I am not interested in threats, but because I believed he deserved to know, in the same way that I deserved to know what was being planned at that party. I told him I had been doing a great deal of thinking about the future and about what I wanted my choices to reflect. I told him that a person who will allocate your home without asking is a person who has demonstrated something important about how they understand the relationship, and that I needed time to think about what I understood in return. He went very still. He said, "Mom, that's not fair." I said, "Daniel, you announced to 40 people that I had agreed to house 4 strangers in my home, without asking me, without warning me. You let them give notice on their apartment, and you did all of this because you assumed I would go along with it once it was already in motion. That is not fair. That is the thing that is not fair." He didn't have an answer for that. He sat with it for a while, and I let him sit with it because some things need to be sat with. Before he left, he asked if there was anything he could do, any way to start repairing things. I said yes. I said that what I needed from him was not gestures or apologies, but behavior. I needed him to understand that I am not a resource. I am his mother. I am a person. And going forward, I needed him to treat me accordingly. He nodded. He hugged me at the door, and it was a real hug, the kind that feels like the person is actually present in it. I hugged him back. I don't know yet what happens next between us. Relationships this complicated don't resolve cleanly, and anyone who tells you they do is selling something. What I know is that I have my house, my locks, my documents, my choices. What I know is that I stood in the middle of my own kitchen on a Saturday morning and said what was true without flinching. What I know is that I am 63 years old, and I built this life corner by corner, and no one gets to hand it away. His in-laws found a 2-bedroom apartment in a less expensive part of the city. Her sister moved in with a friend she had from college. These things work themselves out the way things always work themselves out, when people stop waiting for someone else to solve their problems for them. I went to book club on Thursday. I rearranged the guest room because I decided I wanted a reading chair in there. I planted tulip bulbs along the front walk, because October is the right time for tulips, and I wanted something beautiful to look forward to in the spring. I want to say one more thing before I finish, because I have been thinking about it ever since that night in the restaurant when I sat still and smiled and waited. There is a particular kind of assumption that gets made about women who are older, who live alone, who have extra rooms, who have built quiet, stable lives. The assumption is that they are available, that their stillness means emptiness, that their independence means they have room for other people's crises. That asking would be a formality, when really the answer is obvious. The answer is not obvious. The answer is mine. Every answer about my house, my time, my life, my resources, every single one of those answers belongs to me and to no one else on this earth. Not to my son, not to his wife, not to her family, not to anyone who looks at what I built and decides they have a use for it. I earned every room of this house. I earned the right to decide who walks through the door and who doesn't. I earned the right to say no without explanation, to say no without guilt, to say no without softening it into something more comfortable for the person being told. And I will keep saying it, calmly, clearly, with coffee if you want it, and with an attorney's letter if necessary, for as many times as it needs to be said. My name is on the deed. That is the beginning and the end of the story.